My son invited me to a reconciliation dinner. I was driving to see him with hope in my heart, but a call from my lawyer turned everything upside down. Call me immediately. It's about your son. What I learned broke my heart. Before we continue, please subscribe to True Family Revenge Stories and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The evening sun hung low over Seattle, casting long shadows over the familiar streets I had driven countless times before. The city had a certain calm at this hour, a momentary pause before the chaos of night set in. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter than usual, a knot forming in my stomach that I couldn't quite shake. Daniel, my son, had asked me to meet him for dinner. He said it was time to reconcile, to put the past behind us. I had wanted to believe him. Daniel had always been a complicated soul. Growing up, he was bright, charming, full of potential, but also impulsive, quick to anger, and often reckless in his decisions. College years were marked by occasional poor choices, some that had worried me, but nothing I couldn't forgive, or so I thought. Then came the family business troubles, his risky investments, and the growing tension over my estate. I knew there was friction, but I never imagined betrayal could take such a dark and calculated form. My phone buzzed again, pulling me from my thoughts. It was attorney Marcus Shaw, the one person I trusted to guide me through any legal storm. His name flashing on the screen sent a shiver down my spine. "Sit down before I tell you this," he said, his voice unusually serious. "It's about Daniel. There's been an incident. Something you need to know immediately." I pulled over to the curb, the car idling, my hands shaking slightly as I tried to steady my breathing. "Tell me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus's words hit me like a sledgehammer. "Daniel invited you to dinner. That dinner was not what it seemed. Hospital reports, toxicology results, and witness statements indicate that the meal he prepared was deliberately poisoned. He intended to harm you." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Poisoned? My son? The idea felt surreal, like a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. I stared through the windshield, the streets of Seattle now seeming unfamiliar, threatening, every pedestrian and passing car suddenly suspicious in my mind. Marcus continued, his voice calm but firm. "We need to move quickly. The police are already involved, and I've drafted an emergency update to your will. Your assets must be legally reassigned to someone who truly deserves them, Olivia. She has always been loyal, honest, and trustworthy. Daniel cannot be allowed to benefit from his actions." I felt a strange mix of grief, shock, and a sense of clarity. Grief for the son I thought I knew, shock at the betrayal, and clarity because, in the midst of it all, I finally saw a path forward. Olivia, my youngest, had always been the steady, caring presence in the family. She had nothing to do with Daniel's schemes, nothing but love and respect for everyone in the family. Following Marcus's instructions, I meticulously updated the will. Every clause was reviewed, every word double-checked, every signature notarized. Daniel, my son, was explicitly excluded from any inheritance. The feeling of signing the legal document was unlike anything I had experienced before. It was not the nervousness of an elderly man updating routine paperwork. It was a declaration of control, a firm stand to protect what was rightfully mine and what my late wife would have wanted preserved. Walking back to my car, the April air in Seattle felt sharp but invigorating. I could feel tension slowly leaving my body, replaced by a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. This wasn't just about money. It was about justice, morality, and safeguarding the future of someone who truly deserved it. Daniel had gambled everything on one poisonous dinner. And he had lost. I thought about the night he had planned. The way he had invited me, the charm in his voice, the careful preparation. I realized he had underestimated me, underestimated the extent of loyalty and integrity that Olivia and I represented. The law was now my shield, the will my sword. That night, as I sat in the quiet of my home, I replayed the moments leading up to Marcus's call. I could almost see the scene Daniel had intended. The carefully set table, the wine glass placed just so, the meal prepared with deadly precision. And I realized how close I had come to losing everything. Not just money, not just property, but life itself. I called Olivia and explained the situation in careful detail. Her voice trembled as she listened, but there was also a sense of calm in her understanding. She had always been the kind of person who approached life with clarity, even in the face of chaos. "Dad, I can't believe he would do something like this," she said, a mix of disbelief and sorrow in her tone. "People change, sweetheart," I replied gently. "Sometimes they become strangers wearing familiar faces." Over the next few days, Marcus and I worked tirelessly. We contacted the authorities, ensuring that Daniel's actions were documented, that all evidence was preserved. Every conversation, every medical report, every suspicious behavior was catalogued. Marcus was meticulous, leaving no stone unturned. He even coordinated with the restaurant staff, who had been unaware of the plot but had noticed odd behavior on Daniel's part. The more I learned, the clearer it became that Daniel's intentions were calculated, deliberate, and fueled by desperation. He had been facing financial troubles, and in his twisted logic, he believed that removing me from the equation would secure his inheritance. The irony was bitter. All his schemes, all his plotting, had only revealed the depth of his greed and moral decay. And yet, amid the grief and betrayal, there was a sense of satisfaction, a knowledge that the right person would carry forward our family's legacy. As the days passed, I reflected on the past, on Daniel's childhood, the good moments that now seemed like illusions. I thought about how a parent can be blindsided by someone they raised, how love can sometimes blind us to the potential for harm. But I also realized that resilience comes from action, from protecting those who are loyal and true. The evening before the court proceedings, I walked through the quiet streets of Seattle, thinking about the upcoming legal battle. The city seemed calm, indifferent to the storm that had entered our lives, and yet I felt a deep connection to it. Seattle had been our home for decades, a place where we had built memories, and it now stood as the backdrop to a reckoning. Sitting in the park near Green Lake, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The cherry blossoms were just starting to bloom, delicate and fleeting, much like trust. I thought about my late wife, her wisdom and kindness, and how she would have guided me through this moment with grace. I promised myself that I would honor her memory by ensuring that justice was done, and that Olivia would inherit not just our wealth, but the principles we had always held dear. By the time I returned home, the sun had set, casting long shadows across the city. I knew the path ahead would be difficult, courtrooms, testimonies, scrutiny, but I also knew I was prepared. Marcus had ensured that the legal foundation was solid, and my resolve was stronger than ever. Daniel's betrayal had been a shock, but it had also illuminated the clarity of purpose. That night, I went to bed with a strange mixture of grief, anger, and determination. The betrayal of a son is a wound unlike any other, but the protection of a family's legacy is a responsibility that cannot be ignored. And so, I slept with the knowledge that tomorrow would bring not just confrontation, but justice. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of my Seattle home, casting thin stripes of light across the study where I sat reviewing the documents Marcus had prepared. I still couldn't shake the image of Daniel's smiling face at the dinner table, a smile that now seemed sinister in retrospect. How easily he had hidden his intentions, how well he had played the role of the loving son, the son I had spent decades raising, teaching, and trusting. Marcus arrived shortly after, carrying a briefcase filled with papers, charts, and a thick folder of police reports. He had always been methodical, precise, a man who treated every case as a puzzle to be solved. Today, though, there was a gravity in his eyes that even his normally composed demeanor couldn't mask. "Everything is ready," he said, placing the folder on my desk. "Hospital reports, witness statements, financial records. If Daniel's goal was to remove you and gain access to your estate, it's clear he acted deliberately and with premeditation. The authorities will want to speak with you soon, and we need to make sure the will is airtight before anything else happens." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I understand, Marcus. I can't believe he would do this. How could he?" Marcus sighed, leaning back in his chair. "People aren't always who they appear to be. Even those closest to us can harbor intentions we never suspect. But that's why you have me, to protect your interests, and more importantly, the interests of those who truly deserve them. Olivia will inherit everything you've worked for, and Daniel will not see a single penny." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The betrayal was raw, a wound that cut deep not just financially, but emotionally. I thought of the countless evenings Daniel and I had shared, the advice I had given him, the opportunities one had created. And now, all of that trust had been turned against me. Marcus and I spent the next several hours going over every detail. I read through the emergency will updates multiple times, verifying that each clause left no room for ambiguity. Daniel had been removed from every account, every trust, every asset. Olivia's name was listed clearly as the sole beneficiary. Marcus explained every legal nuance, every contingency, ensuring that no loophole remained. By the end of the day, the legal framework to protect my family and my legacy was complete. That evening, I drove to Olivia's apartment in Capitol Hill. She had been staying there since moving back to Seattle after college, a quiet sanctuary from the chaos of the family estate. Seeing her again, hearing her voice, reminded me why this was all worth protecting. She greeted me with a warm hug, unaware of the full extent of what had transpired. "I've spoken with Marcus," I said carefully, choosing my words. "He's ensured that everything is legally secure. You will inherit everything. Daniel, he will not." Olivia's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and disbelief crossing her face. I don't know what to say. I always knew, Dad, that you were careful, but I never imagined he could do something like this." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "It's hard to accept, sweetheart. But sometimes the people we love the most make choices that show us who they really are. Daniel has made his choice, and now it's time for us to protect ourselves and what's rightfully ours." Over the next week, Marcus coordinated with the police, ensuring that Daniel's actions were documented. Interviews were conducted, statements taken, and medical reports filed. Each piece of evidence painted a damning picture of Daniel's intentions. The ricin poisoning, a rare compound that only a few people knew how to handle, was traced directly to the dinner he had prepared. His inquiries about my will in the days leading up to the dinner, his anxious questioning about financial accounts, all contributed to the growing case against him. Meanwhile, Olivia and I began preparing for the inevitable legal proceedings. We met with Marcus regularly, reviewing courtroom strategy, discussing potential questions from the prosecution and defense, and rehearsing testimony. I felt a strange mixture of dread and determination. Dread at the thought of seeing my son in a courtroom, determination to ensure that justice was done. One afternoon, as we walked through Pike Place Market, a place I had visited countless times over the years, I reflected on how life could change in an instant. The vibrant stalls, the chatter of tourists, the smell of fresh fish and flowers, it all felt like a surreal backdrop to the storm brewing in my personal life. I thought about how Daniel had plotted in the shadows while I had gone about my life, unaware of the danger that lurked so close. Olivia broke my reverie. "Dad, how did you know something was wrong? I mean, why didn't you just go to dinner like he asked?" I smiled faintly, a mix of sadness and resolve in my expression. "Call it intuition. Call it experience. But more than that, I trusted Marcus. He was the first to tell me that Daniel's intentions were not what they seemed. Without that warning, I might have walked right into danger." The following days were a blur of activity. Court dates were scheduled, evidence compiled, and witness lists finalized. Marcus coordinated with the prosecutor, a sharp and capable woman named Clara Jensen, who quickly grasped the severity of the case. Together, we reviewed every detail, ensuring that no inconsistencies could be exploited by Daniel's defense team. One evening, as I sat in the dim light of my study reviewing testimony notes, I thought about Daniel and what had driven him to this point. Was it purely greed, desperation, or had he always harbored a darker side, one that only revealed itself under pressure? I realized that no matter the reason, his actions had consequences, and those consequences would be enforced in the courtroom. The night before the first hearing, Olivia and I sat together in the living room, reviewing notes and discussing strategy. She had grown into a remarkably composed young woman, her intelligence and integrity shining through even in the most stressful situations. "Dad," she said softly, "I know this is hard, but you've always taught me that we must do what's right, even when it's difficult. I believe in you, in us." Her words gave me a renewed sense of purpose. The betrayal of a child is one of the deepest wounds a parent can endure, but protecting the innocent, preserving what is just, and ensuring that integrity triumphs over greed, those were the principles that would guide us through the coming days. The first day of court arrived, and the gravity of the situation became palpable. The Seattle courthouse was imposing, its stone facade and towering columns a reminder of the weight of justice. As we entered the building, The bustling activity, the chatter of attorneys, and the quiet murmurs of observers all seemed to fade away, leaving only the path I needed to follow, the pursuit of truth and justice. We were ushered into a conference room first, where Clara Jensen briefed us on courtroom procedures, the order of testimony, and what to expect from the defense. Daniel's lawyer, a sharp and calculating man named Henry Carr, had already filed motions to challenge evidence and delay proceedings. Marcus assured me that every legal contingency had been anticipated, every loophole closed. Sitting across from me, Olivia squeezed my hand. Her composure belied the storm of emotions swirling within both of us. "Dad," she whispered, "we'll get through this. Together." The hours leading up to the hearing were tense. We reviewed the evidence one final time. Medical reports, toxicology analyses, witness statements, Daniel's suspicious behavior leading up to the dinner. Everything pointed to deliberate intent, a calculated plan to harm me and secure what he believed was his inheritance. By the time the courtroom doors opened, I felt a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. The faces of the public, the reporters, and the court staff seemed to blur, leaving only Daniel and the path to justice. The stage was set, and the first chapter of this confrontation, one that would test family loyalty, morality, and legal acumen, was about to unfold. As I took my seat, I realized something profound. The betrayal of a child is devastating, but the pursuit of justice, the protection of those who are loyal and deserving, and the integrity of one's actions are forces that cannot be broken. Daniel had set the trap, but we were ready to face it, and the outcome would ensure that right, not greed, prevailed. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and polished stone, a mixture of authority and tension that seemed to cling to the walls. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the nerves twisting in my stomach. Sitting at the plaintiff's table beside Olivia, I watched as the door opened and Daniel entered. His once confident demeanor had been replaced with a hollow, cautious expression. The expensive blazer he wore hung loosely on his now thinner frame, a reminder that the last few weeks in custody had been harsh on him. Emily, his accomplice in this terrible scheme, followed behind, her gaze fixed on the floor as though avoiding the reality of what was about to unfold. Clara Jensen, the prosecutor, tapped her folder decisively and motioned for us to rise. All rise. The court is now in session. Judge Harrison Green, an older man with a steady voice and a reputation for fairness, peered over his glasses. Please be seated. We are here today to begin the proceedings in the case of attempted murder against Daniel Porter and Emily Klein. Mr. Gray, you may take the witness stand. I rose, my legs steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. The memory of the dinner, the careful placement of the poisoned ricin in my plate, Daniel's feigned concern, the anxious glances exchanged with Emily, flashed before my eyes. But I had trained myself to remain calm. Every detail I recalled would be critical. Every word I spoke would shape the jury's understanding of the calculated betrayal. Marcus gave me a small, reassuring nod as I approached the stand. Clara guided me through the process, her voice calm but firm. Mr. Gray, please tell the court about the events of March 11th, when you were poisoned. I took a deep breath, looking directly at the jury. My son, Daniel, invited me to a reconciliation dinner. I had no reason to suspect him. I had hoped to repair the strained relationship between us, to share a meal in good faith. But what I didn't know, what I could not have known, was that Daniel had planned to poison me to gain access to my inheritance. A murmur rippled through the small crowd of spectators, mostly reporters and curious onlookers who had been drawn to the sensational nature of the case. I ignored them, focusing instead on the details. I remember sitting at the table, I continued, and noticing the care with which Daniel prepared the meal. Emily, his accomplice, was unusually attentive to my plate and drink. At first, I thought it was politeness. But Marcus, my lawyer, had warned me that Daniel's questions about my will, the sudden interest in my financial affairs, and the secretive dinner invitation were all red flags. By the time the poison took effect, I realized I had been targeted by someone I had trusted my entire life. Clara nodded, turning to present the medical evidence. Your Honor, we have the toxicology report confirming the presence of ricin in Mr. Gray's system. Dr. Patel, who treated Mr. Gray in the emergency room, will testify to the effects and severity of the poisoning. I listened as the report was read aloud, detailing the immediate risk to my life and the careful interventions required to stabilize me. Each word reinforced the gravity of Daniel's actions. He had gambled with my life for money. He had betrayed every ounce of trust one had placed in him. Henry Carr, Daniel's defense lawyer, rose to speak, attempting to cast doubt. Your Honor, we contend that the poisoning was accidental, perhaps a result of contaminated ingredients at the restaurant. My clients had no intention of causing harm. I glanced at Daniel. His lips trembled as if he wanted to protest, to deny the truth, but the evidence spoke louder than any words he could muster. The messages, the bank inquiries, the recorded conversations, all pointed to a deliberate and premeditated act. Clara continued methodically. We also have records of Daniel's inquiries about his father's estate in the weeks leading up to the dinner, including the dates he specifically asked about potential changes to the will. The timing is critical. These actions demonstrate planning and intent, not accident. I recounted the events in meticulous detail, describing how I had felt the first signs of the poisoning, the confusion, the sudden weakness. I remembered the panic that had set in as I realized that someone I loved had turned against me. But amidst the fear, I felt clarity. Daniel had gambled everything on one act, and now he would face the consequences. The defense attempted to discredit my testimony, suggesting exaggeration and emotional bias. But Marcus had anticipated this. We had prepared for every question, every potential challenge. I answered calmly, each word measured, each detail precise. The jury listened, rapt, as I recounted the sequence of events, my interactions with Daniel and Emily, and the coordinated behavior at the dinner. Clara then called Olivia to the stand. She recounted her observations, the unusual behavior she had noticed in Daniel, the secrecy surrounding the dinner, and the concern that had prompted her to support her father's decision to involve the authorities. Her composure, her intelligence, and her emotional clarity lent weight to the case. Witnesses followed, including Dr. Patel, who explained the medical intervention required to save my life, and Tess, a private investigator who had tracked the purchase of the ricin and confirmed Daniel's involvement. Each testimony built a damning narrative, one that left little room for doubt. Finally, the jury was excused to deliberate. Olivia and I waited in the hallway, the tension almost unbearable. Marcus paced quietly, reviewing notes, while I tried to focus on my breathing. The hours stretched endlessly, each minute a reminder of what was at stake. When the jury returned, their expressions were serious, somber, almost heavy with the weight of responsibility. Judge Green called the court to order and asked the foreperson to read the verdict. Daniel Porter and Emily Klein, the foreperson began, after careful deliberation, the jury finds you guilty of attempted murder in the first degree. A sharp intake of breath escaped from Daniel. His composure, so carefully maintained, finally crumbled. Emily's face paled, her eyes widening as the reality of their actions settled in. The courtroom was silent except for the echo of the foreperson's voice. Judge Green nodded solemnly. This court sentences Daniel Porter and Emily Klein each to 15 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Your actions have consequences, and justice has been served. As the defendants were led away in handcuffs, I felt a wave of relief wash over me, tempered by a deep, unshakable sadness. The son I had raised, the boy I had nurtured and taught, had become a stranger in his own skin. The betrayal ran deep, but the law had intervened, restoring some semblance of balance to the chaos. Olivia and I walked out of the courthouse together, the April sun warm against our faces. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace, a quiet confidence that the right outcome had been reached. We had faced the darkest shadow of betrayal and emerged with justice on our side. As we stepped into the street, Olivia turned to me. "Dad, what happens now?" I squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of relief, responsibility, and hope. "Now, sweetheart, we live. We honor our values, the integrity your mother believed in. We protect what's rightfully ours. And we move forward, together." The courthouse behind us, the heavy burden of fear and betrayal lifted. I knew that while Daniel had gambled everything on one poisonous dinner, we had won far more than the inheritance at stake. We had reclaimed our lives, our trust, and our family's honor. Marcus caught up to us, a faint smile breaking his usual stoic demeanor. "It's done. You did well, all of you." The evidence was overwhelming, and the law prevailed. I nodded, grateful not only for his guidance but for the clarity he had brought to an impossible situation. Daniel's life had been altered forever, the consequences of his greed and malice inescapable. Emily's future, too, was bound by the choices she had made. And Olivia would inherit not just wealth, but the knowledge that integrity, honesty, and loyalty always triumph over deceit. Walking back to the car, I reflected on the lessons embedded in this ordeal. Life is unpredictable, and the people we trust can sometimes betray us in unimaginable ways. But with careful preparation, clear thinking, and unwavering commitment to what is right, even the darkest betrayals can be confronted and overcome. The sun was setting over Seattle, casting a golden glow on the water and the skyline. It was a reminder that even after the storm, there is light. Even after betrayal, there is hope. And even after losing everything you thought was secure, it is possible to rebuild, to protect those who matter most, and to ensure that justice is served. The days following the trial were quiet, almost unnervingly so. The tension that had gripped our home for weeks seemed to dissipate, leaving an echoing silence in its wake. Olivia and I spent time in the living room of our Seattle home, the late afternoon sun spilling through the wide bay windows, casting long golden shadows across the hardwood floor. It was a peaceful scene, but beneath that tranquility lay a lingering vigilance, a reminder that trust, once shattered, is never easily rebuilt. I found myself thinking constantly about Daniel and Emily, their faces marked with shock, fear, and the dawning realization of the consequences they had wrought upon themselves. 15 years, or possibly more if parole was denied, stretched ahead of them like a horizon they could no longer reach. They had gambled on greed and deception, but the law and careful preparation had intervened, preventing the unthinkable. Olivia sat beside me on the couch, her fingers tracing patterns on the upholstery as she asked the question I knew would come eventually. "Dad, are you going to change your will again?" I exhaled slowly. The legal documents had been painstakingly updated in the weeks before the trial, ensuring that Daniel would be completely excluded from any inheritance, and that everything would pass directly to Olivia. The notary had signed, sealed, and finalized the revisions. Marcus had meticulously overseen the process. Yet, the thought of the betrayal still made the process feel intensely personal. "Yes, sweetheart," I said quietly. "Everything is set now. You are the sole heir. Everything I've worked for, everything your mother and I built, will be yours. I want to make sure that nothing, absolutely nothing, can take that away from you." She leaned into me, and I could see the mix of grief and relief in her eyes. Losing trust in a parent is a wound unlike any other. It cuts deep, reshapes the perception of safety, and yet, in the end, it can reveal the resilience and strength of those who remain loyal. Olivia had been by my side through the legal battles, the police interviews, and the endless consultations with Marcus, proving herself worthy of both the responsibility and the inheritance she now held. Our conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Marcus stepped in, holding a thick manila envelope. "I thought you might want to review a few final documents," he said, setting it on the coffee table. "These cover the trust for Olivia and the remaining assets. Everything is in order." I opened the envelope carefully, flipping through the pages. Trust funds, property titles, bank accounts, and investments, everything meticulously catalogued, legally airtight, and protected from potential future threats. Marcus watched quietly, allowing me the space to absorb the enormity of what had been achieved. "You've done more than I could have asked for," I said, gratitude thick in my voice. "Not just for the legal work, but for protecting my family." Marcus nodded. "That's what I'm here for, and it's clear who deserves to inherit. Olivia has proven herself, not just in the courtroom, but in the way she's handled everything since the poisoning attempt. She is responsible, cautious, and loyal. Daniel and Emily, on the other hand, their choices made them unworthy." We spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing the documents, discussing the details, and confirming that the trust arrangements were both secure and equitable. Marcus's calm presence brought a sense of closure, even as the shadow of betrayal lingered in our minds. As evening approached, Olivia and I decided to take a walk along the waterfront. The Puget Sound was calm, its waves lapping gently against the docks, the reflection of the city lights shimmering on the water. The air was crisp, carrying a faint scent of salt and pine. It was the kind of peaceful moment that felt almost surreal after the chaos of recent weeks. "I can't believe it's over," Olivia whispered, her voice tinged with wonder. "It feels like a nightmare, but at the same time, I'm relieved. Justice was served." I smiled, though my eyes remained distant, reflecting on the full scope of events. Yes, justice has been served. But remember, sweetheart, the law doesn't erase the memory of betrayal. It doesn't undo the choices people make. It just ensures that those choices have consequences. We walked in silence for a few minutes, the rhythmic sound of our footsteps on the wooden pier blending with the distant call of seabirds. I thought about how fragile relationships can be when tainted by greed, how a single act of malice can unravel years of love and trust. Daniel had gambled everything on one poisonous dinner, and in doing so, had lost far more than I could have imagined: his freedom, his future, and the right to be called my son. The weight of that reality pressed heavily on me. Yet, in the midst of it, there was a sense of clarity. We had survived. We had navigated the treacherous waters of betrayal and deceit, emerging with justice, integrity, and the protection of what mattered most. Olivia would inherit not only material wealth, but also the knowledge that truth and loyalty ultimately prevail. Returning home, we found comfort in routine. Meals, conversations, and quiet evenings took on new meaning. The poisoning incident had taught us to cherish every moment of normalcy, to value honesty and vigilance, and to recognize the strength in those who remain loyal during the darkest times. One morning, as I reviewed the final financial statements with Marcus, Olivia approached, holding a small box of letters and notes. "Dad, these are from Mom," she said softly. "I thought you'd want to read them." Opening the box, I found letters written years ago, filled with wisdom, love, and guidance. My late wife had anticipated the challenges we might face, the complexities of family dynamics, and the importance of safeguarding not just wealth, but the values we held dear. Reading her words now, in the aftermath of Daniel's betrayal, was both comforting and haunting. She had always emphasized integrity, loyalty, and foresight. And in many ways, the trials we had endured had reinforced the truth of her advice. Weeks turned into months. The legal process concluded entirely, the estate settled, and the trust fully implemented. Marcus had done more than ensure that the documents were legally sound. He had helped restore a sense of order and control to a life that had been upended by deceit. Olivia thrived in her new role as the rightful heir, approaching her responsibilities with maturity, intelligence, and compassion. One evening, as we watched the sunset from our balcony overlooking Elliott Bay, Olivia turned to me. "Dad, I know what happened with Daniel and Emily will always be a part of our story, but I'm glad we faced it together. And I'm glad I get to carry forward what you and Mom built." I nodded, feeling a swell of pride and relief. "Yes, sweetheart. You've proven yourself. And remember this, you carry not just our wealth, but our values, our integrity, and the strength of a family that survived even the darkest betrayal." In the quiet of that evening, I reflected on how close we had come to losing everything, not just financially, but emotionally. Trust had been shattered, lives had been nearly destroyed, and yet we had endured. Daniel and Emily would spend the prime of their lives behind bars, paying for choices that were both cruel and selfish. Olivia would inherit a legacy that was secure, protected, and infused with the values her mother and I had instilled. Justice, at last, had been served. But beyond justice, there was the restoration of balance, the reaffirmation that actions have consequences, and the recognition that loyalty, love, and foresight ultimately shape the future more than greed or deceit ever could. The chapter of betrayal was closed, and the path forward was clear. We would live with integrity, honor the memory of those we loved, and ensure that our family's legacy was carried on by someone deserving, someone who had proven through every challenge that they were worthy. As night fell over Seattle, the lights of the city reflected on the water, shimmering like tiny stars. Olivia and I stood side by side, taking in the beauty and serenity of the moment. For the first time since the poisoning incident, I felt the weight lift entirely, replaced by hope, resolve, and the satisfaction of having done what was right. And now, for those of you watching this story unfold on true family revenge stories, remember this: betrayal can come from the people closest to you, but preparation, vigilance, and integrity can protect what truly matters. Never underestimate the importance of safeguarding your family, your legacy, and the people who genuinely deserve your trust. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the strength required to protect what's yours, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts or your own experiences with betrayal and justice. Your stories matter, and your support helps ensure that more people learn from real-life tales of courage, vigilance, and triumph over deceit.